Welcome to the AEN Stories channel.
I was 37 the fall the PTA became my second home, and if you'd told me a year earlier I'd end up thinking of a school gym as a kind of church, I would have laughed. I teach U.S. history, 11th grade, mostly, at Franklin High, a place where the brick looks sun-baked even in February and the tennis courts have more cracks than the budget. Like a lot of folks in public schools these days, I learned you don't just clock out. You coach, you chaperone, you show up for the bake sale because the science lab needs pipettes and the district is busy arguing over consultants. I joined the PTA the way some people join a gym, 3 good intentions per week, 1 long stretch of guilt, and then a surprising habit. I liked the people. Parents who worked long hours and still found time to fold raffle tickets, grandparents who could turn a stack of flyers into a précis on community organizing, a few teachers who pretended we didn't want to talk shop and did anyway. I liked the work. There is something quietly holy about holding a paper cup of coffee in a hallway that smells like crayons and old varnish while you staple sign-up sheets to a wall. It feels like you're holding the fabric together with your hands. My wife, Emily, liked it too, at least at first. She said she loved how alive I was around the kids. You come home talking about teenagers like they're small cities, she said, and then rolled her eyes in a way that made me feel like the luckiest dummy alive. Emily is 4 years younger than me. We met when I was 28 and finding my feet in a classroom where the desks wobbled and the thermostat was a rumor. She walked into a happy hour with a friend of a friend, ordered a club soda like an apology, and laughed at something I said about the whiskey rebellion like it was the first time anyone had ever thrown that particular joke into the air and expected it to fly. She likes to organize. She likes lists and candles and the kind of throw pillows that make a couch look like a bed you're not allowed to mess up. When we bought our little ranch on Maple Street, she painted the front door blue without asking because she said the house wanted to breathe better. It did. There's always a family in the PTA who seems to have been born doing this. At Franklin, that was the Grants. Tom Grant owns a construction company that advertises on the Pee Wee soccer jerseys and sponsors the Grants Grinders concession stand at football games. His wife, Laura, runs everything not nailed down and 3 things that are. They have 2 kids at the school, a daughter who can talk you into buying a t-shirt you don't need because it's limited edition, and a son who treats the weight room like a therapy office. They're good people. We all are, but people like them because it's easier to join gravity than fight it. The affair, the word still feels like I'm borrowing a script from someone else's life, started in a way that would have been funny if it hadn't been mine. The man was a father, of course. These stories like neat categories: neighbor, coworker, someone who sits 1 row over at church. In our case, it was a dad on the PTA email list named Evan Miller. He's tall in that deliberate way people get when they've learned height is currency. Soft beard. Hands that look like they belong on a steering wheel of a car he washes at home. His daughter, Nora, is smart and brittle, the kind of kid who will undercut you with a joke if you get too close to the true thing she's working on. Evan volunteered to handle the silent auction, which meant he spent 3 months walking a line between begging and boasting as he collected gift certificates to restaurants that will close in 6 months, baskets full of artisanal jam, and a weekend at a lake house that we all suspected would smell like someone else's aftershave. I didn't clock him at first. Why would I? He was a dad who said let me know how I can help and meant it enough to answer texts late. Emily said he was surprisingly organized, for a man, and I smiled and said, "Hey," and she kissed my cheek and said, "You know what I mean," and I did. We are born into our jokes and only later decide which ones fit. He wore hoodies to meetings and brought fancy sparkling water and once offered to build us a better sign for the school's front lawn because the current one looked like it had been hammered by a person with grudges. He seemed like he had time. That's a magnet all its own. If I wanted to tell it like a friend of mine would, this friend who writes his life like a tidy essay, I'd say I first felt something wrong in my body, the way you sense a front coming in before the clouds organize. It wasn't like that. It was small things. Emily answered a text with her face turned ever so slightly away. She laughed at something and when I asked, "What?" she said, "Oh, nothing," in a key I didn't recognize. She started staying after meetings to help straighten up, and I believed her because I know how much time a room can need before it looks like itself again. Franklin High has 2 teacher lounges. The one near the English wing smells like tea and fresh photocopies and people who own cardigans. The one near social studies smells like coffee burned to a caramel and microwaved spaghetti. On a Tuesday, after school and before the PTA planning session for the fall festival, I stopped in there to fill a water jug because the one in the gym had a leak like an apology. I pushed the door open with my hip because my hands were full of Dixie cups and a stack of file folders, and I heard, before I saw, two parents speaking in that excited whisper people adopt when they want to be bad and feel safe enough not to pay for it. "Saw her get out of his car yesterday," one voice said. "Right at the corner by the baseball field, like she's invisible." A woman, amused. "From Evans?" the other asked, half scandal, half glee. "Blue Subaru, salt streaks on the side from last winter." "Don't pretend not to know," the first said. "Same one from pickup." She stepped out smoothing her hair, and here the voice turned soft and cruel like she just remembered she had a husband who knows her hair down. "I don't know if you've ever tried to hold still with your whole body while your insides lurch forward. It's a small miracle humans can do it. I did." I stood with my hand on the steel handle of the water jug and watched a bead of condensation fatten and fall. I didn't move until they did. The scrape of chairs, the polite cough of a person making noise so you won't feel surprised, feet on linoleum. The door opposite creaked. They left. I walked to the sink and turned on the water and stuck my hand under the stream like it had insulted me. I didn't go looking for more that day. I did what I tell my students when a source shocks them: write down what happened, and then wait to assign blame until you've got another source. I went to the gym and taped signs that said "Please do not move the tables to tables people would move." I smiled at the custodian and asked him about his grandson's little league. I texted Emily, "You coming tonight?" And she wrote, "Yep. Late. Start without me," red heart emoji. It landed on me like a nickel thrown into a bucket, light and noisy and not worth the trouble of retrieving. The historian in me went to work. You think it's the jealous part? It wasn't, not first. It was the part of me that believes in patterns. I watched who walked in late to meetings and whether they came in alone or in pairs. I watched who hung back to help fold tables and where their eyes went when someone said, "I can take those." I noticed that when Evan said he needed to run to his car, Emily often found a reason to go outside, trash to the dumpster, a call she had to take. I noticed that when Evan's daughter had a volleyball game on a Saturday, Emily suggested we swing by the school just to check on the banner situation, and when we got there the gym was empty and her mood was, too. I started counting the times going to Target took long enough to be an errand and a meal. You can talk yourself right past the truth if you like yourself enough. I like myself just enough to own that I waited because I didn't want to be the villain in a story where I was already the mark. I waited a week. The fall festival fell on a Saturday with the kind of weather the Midwest only remembers to give you once the kids have already picked Halloween costumes that require coats. It was bright cool, sweatshirt weather. The trees had just turned like they all got a memo. We had a dunk tank. We had a hair ride with bales that left your shins dusty. We had the kind of raffle where you can spend $40 on a book of tickets and feel like the math makes sense because one of them might win you a basket of coffee that will taste like a memory of coffee for 6 months. I wore my Franklin hoodie and a baseball cap and my smile that says, "I am happy to help," because mostly I was. Helping is a habit. Emily worked the silent auction table because she has neat handwriting and likes to watch people get competitive. Evan floated, making himself useful, which looks a lot like being handy with a roll of tape and a smile. He brought his Subaru around to the back in the afternoon to haul in a stack of donated folding chairs a church lent us, parking the way people do when they have permission, too close to the door. I watched him pop the trunk. I watched him smile at 3 volunteers with the kind of grin that makes people think they're on his team. I felt calm in the way that worries me about myself sometimes, the way you get when you already know how a scene goes and are just waiting for the curtain. That's when I walked up to him with a wave. "Hey, Evan," I said, and he looked like a man who wants to be liked. "You mind helping me haul some stuff? I've got 2 of those big bins of extension cords and power strips. We can toss them in your trunk and I'll meet you at the gym." He said, "Absolutely," and clapped his hands once like a coach. "Pop them in." I lifted the bin and set it on the bumper and then, because I am sometimes the version of myself I was as a teenager, I said, Mind if I make sure there's room? And open the trunk wider. Emily's jacket lay on top like it owned the space. It's a green jacket, the kind the catalogs call utility, with pockets deep enough to lose a house key and a drawstring waist that makes a point. It has a tiny tear under the left pocket where she snagged it on the back fence last spring pulling a branch off the lilac and swore at it, then laughed because she doesn't like the sound of her own swears. Next to it lay her scarf, navy with a thin gold thread, the one I bought at the winter market last year from a woman who called herself a fiber artist and made me feel like I was both a good husband and a mark. There was a small white tag tied to a loop in the scarf, a tag Emily never removed because she said it made it look fancy. The tag had the vendor's name on it, in hand-drawn script. I tucked the thin business card from that vendor into the scarf's bag with a note that said, "For the cold days." My handwriting is different. I recognize the curve of the F. You know the feeling when a sound goes too loud in a small space? The way the ceiling seems to drop? The trunk felt like that. I reached in and lifted the scarf gently, like it was sleeping. Evan said, "Oh," and then nothing else, because he is, if nothing else, a man who knows when a narrative shifts out of his hands. "Interesting choice of transportation, Emily," I said, turning my head without lifting my eyes off the trunk. The sentence landed like a book thumping closed in a quiet library. Conversations faltered in that ripple people do when they sense a center shift. A few heads turned in the way people do when they don't want to be caught witnessing but they won't forgive themselves if they miss the moment. Emily was 10 feet away, at the auction table. The sign-up sheets fluttered a little because the air had gone thinner. She went white. Not embarrassed pink, not guilty. White, like paper. She took half a step and then stopped, because running is for people who haven't already agreed to be seen. The room, or the gym, but it felt like a room, did a collective intake of breath, as if we were all going to jump into a cold lake together and weren't sure we were brave enough. The PTA president, a man who can talk a fire code into looking the other way, looked down at his clipboard and found his pen deeply, deeply interesting. "What are you implying?" Evan asked, brave, then smaller. We both knew he was throwing the word into the air just to see if it came back with a softer landing. He's a man who likes a lasso. "I'm not implying," I said, calm the way you get when the sentence says itself. "I'm looking at my wife's jacket. And the scarf I bought her, with the tag I tied because I wanted to be sweet and now I am very, very tired of being sweet." Emily found a place for her eyes on the floor. She looked up once and met mine and looked away. You practice this look in the mirror as a kid when you don't want to be caught and it becomes useful in adulthood if you still don't. People say they hate public scenes, but our culture is built around them. We understand spectacle. I didn't want one. I also didn't want to do this in a hallway that smelled like feet. So I did the worst possible thing for everyone's nerves, I stood still. "We're adults," I said, but I was talking to myself. "We can be concise." I looked up then, not at Emily but at the group of people who had become my small city, the PTA parents, the custodian with his keys like a song at his belt, the two teachers who had wandered over with that keen mix of guilt and curiosity, the principal whose job it is to turn drama into policy. "Someone will say I should have done this privately," I said. "Maybe they're right." I looked at Emily again because I owed her my face. "I overheard something in the lounge last week. I waited a week because I wanted to be sure. Today, I asked to put things in the trunk because the trunk tells stories." This one told a complete sentence. I lifted the scarf. The tag swung. "We don't need any more words. We all have jobs." Silence can be kind or cruel. This one was kind. No one asked questions. No one made a joke. No one filmed, or if they did, they had the decency to do it in a way I didn't see. Evan closed the trunk softly, as if that could make the facts go back to wherever we keep the things we're not ready to name. The thing about living in a small city inside a larger one is word moves like water. It finds a level. It got to Emily's parents before we did. The Hopkinses, Margaret, and Peter, have been in the community long enough that their names are shorthand. They give to everything. They host the kind of Christmas party you suspect is written into the charter somewhere. They raised Emily in a house where you had to ask to borrow the good mixer because the good mixer is for guests. They liked me from the start. I like to think it's because I'm charming and patient and know how to make a pie crust that doesn't need apology. It's probably because I'm a teacher and teachers are safe in a way that helps you sleep at night. They arrived at the gym as we were coiling cords. Margaret had cried enough to make her eyes look like she'd been gardening in the wind. Peter looked like a person who had found out something he never wanted to know and is trying hard to be the sort of man who can hold it in public. They didn't find Emily first. They found me. "Ryan," Margaret said, and hugged me, which surprised me so much I forgot to be gracious. Her perfume smelled like a memory I couldn't find. "I'm so sorry," she said, and then, quieter, to herself, "I'm so ashamed." Peter shook my hand like he was balancing a checkbook and looked over my shoulder at Emily like he was trying to locate her on a map. He said, "I don't know what to say," which is exactly what you should say when you don't. "I know what to say," Margaret said, and turned, and the 4 words had the weight of mothers who have had practice. "What were you thinking?" Emily cried then. There are kinds of crying that make you want to step forward and offer a shoulder and a tissue and a chance to be someone's friend. This wasn't that. This was quiet, contained, a leak in a dam. "I was lonely," she said, and the phrase clicked into place like a key in a lock you've turned before. He was attentive. She grimaced when she heard herself. "And I thought it was small, somehow, like it wouldn't leave footprints." Peter closed his eyes. "It always leaves footprints." He forced a small breath into being and then another, like a man on a treadmill praying for the mile marker. "We will handle this," he said, which is what you say when you can't fix it. I didn't yell. I didn't make a speech. I did something I'm not proud of and also am. I asked the principal if I could take the extension cords home because I didn't trust them not to disappear if they spent the night in the gym, and we put them in my car instead. Then I told Emily I'd like to talk at home, and she nodded, and I went ahead with the cords because you need something in your hands when you walk across a parking lot after a scene. Margaret walked with me, her shoulder touching my arm like you do when you need to be a prop for a person and a person for a prop. "We love you," she said. "We are so sorry." I said, "I know," because she needed it to be true and I wanted to give her something. At home, the house felt smaller in the way houses do when you're sharing air with a person who wants a sentence you don't have. We sat at the table we bought second-hand and scented ourselves when we were 29 and full of smugness about how few things we owned. Emily said, "I'm sorry," and I said, "I know," because it was true and because the word is both a blanket and a knife. She said, "Do you want to know?" and I said, "Not details." We talked about logistics because logistics is a kindness when your heart has stopped being interesting to itself. We made a list. We always make lists. She would go to her parents for the week. I would stay in the house. We would find a therapist if only to say we had. We would look up lawyers not because we couldn't imagine not needing them but because imagining not needing them felt like the kind of denial that breeds rot. People like to shape trauma into a neat narrative arc, inciting incident, confrontation, resolution. In real life, it's a series of Tuesdays. I went to work. I told my principal, who said, "Take a day if you need it," and I said, "I teach reconstruction today," and she nodded like that was the same thing as "I'm fine." I told the PTA board I needed a week off from meeting about the winter fundraiser. The president said, "Whatever you need," which is the kind of phrase people throw onto a hurting thing like glitter. My students looked at me like they look at adults whose faces have changed. Even the ones who make it their job to test me on Mondays asked fewer questions. Teenagers are not half as careless as most adults. Margaret dropped meals on our porch in reusable containers she wouldn't let me return. Peter came by with a rake and did the front yard like we had an appointment. He didn't say a word about what had happened. He said, "Your soil's a mess, and you need to reseed this patch, and do you have a rental for a plug aerator, or should I call someone?" And it was the most generous thing anyone's done for me. He made my yard a problem he could solve because my life wasn't one. People talk about the power of words. I submit that a man with a rake is scripture. I won't pretend I didn't go dark some nights. The quiet in our house changed its pitch. My mind did the lazy thing where it plays the worst clip on a loop. I did the better thing where I texted a friend and said, "You free for a beer in your garage?" and then sat in a lawn chair and let him talk about his basement flooding and his daughter's braces and the way the city always repaves the wrong streets. I ran more. I made spaghetti with too much garlic. I slept on the side of the bed I always slept on and refused to move to the middle like some sort of declaration because I am allowed to be petty in small places. We did therapy. It didn't save the marriage. It saved the part of me that wants to imagine I'm above learning. The therapist asked the right question once: when did you first notice the loneliness in the room? And we both spoke at the same time and then laughed, which is what you do when your answer is sooner than we admitted. She asked, "Do you consider this the first betrayal?" And I said, "No," and Emily said, "Yes," and we both understood something that had lived unnamed: you can betray someone long before someone else's car becomes a venue. Divorce is logistics. People who haven't done it think it's drama. It can be both, but the paperwork wins. You list assets and debts and argue over objects that should not be metaphors: the big skillet, the bookshelf you built together and now measure in inches like the inches could measure everything you won't say. Because we don't have kids, some of the questions were easy and some were worse. Do you want this painting? A friend asked as she helped me box the bedroom, and I realized I had never liked it and liked the version of myself that liked it. No, I said, and it felt like a small relief and a small grief at once. People will ask, if they're close enough to think they're allowed, about the parents. Emily's parents made their choice faster than most. They showed up for me. They did not disown their daughter. That would be convenient for a storyteller and cruel in practice. They stood facing the truth with their hands out. They helped Emily move back into her childhood room for a while, and reorganize the pantry, because that's what humans do when they've been rattled: make shelves new. Margaret cried for both of us when she hugged me the first time after the paperwork was filed. Peter replaced my mailbox, which had rusted through at the bottom, without asking, and texted me a photo of it upright like a soldier. If this sounds neat, it wasn't. There were days Margaret wouldn't answer her phone because her throat hurt from all the sorries. There were days Peter said, "I want to hit something," and then built a birdhouse. There were days Emily texted me something small, a photo of the plant on the windowsill we hadn't managed to kill, and I wrote back "looks good," and felt human and felt like I was scraping the inside of my chest with the back of a spoon. Every life contains two truths at once, and the trick is learning which one to feed. School kept me alive. That's not an overstatement. The seniors needed letters of recommendation. The sophomores needed me to explain why a paper map can make a person feel powerful. The freshman JV soccer team needed someone to yell "good hustle" on a cold field while the sun bled out behind the bleachers. The PTA, God bless them, kept inviting me without requiring me. They found a way to balance being gentle and being ordinary. Sometimes a parent would squeeze my shoulder when they walked past, and sometimes they'd toss me a roll of tape and say, "We need this banner higher," and both felt like forgiveness without the noise. Evan left. He said it was because he got a project in another district, and maybe he did. I don't know. I know he stopped showing up with sparkling water and free lumber. I know his daughter finished her season with a different look in her eye, harder, then softer. I caught her after class once and said, "If you ever need an extension, just ask." She shrugged a teenage shrug that means 100 things and said, "Thanks," and turned away quick so I wouldn't see her eyes get wet. I pretended not to notice. It was the kindest thing I had to give. People love a redemption arc. I think I might be on one, but not in a way that will fit into a YouTube title. It's smaller. I'm nicer to the kid who forgets his pencil, because sometimes forgetting your pencil is a symptom, not a failure. I call my mother on Tuesdays, not because I have a story but because she likes to hear the empty places in my sentences. I joined a trivia team at O'Grady's on Thursdays with 3 other teachers and a parent who knows everything about birds. We lose elegantly. I started a Saturday morning walking group with 2 dads from the PTA who have the same problem I do: too much time in their own heads between 9 and noon. We walk the loop around the reservoir and complain about the price of bananas and agree that complaining about the price of bananas is how you know you've aged into your proper genre. I saw Emily in the spring at the farmer's market. She was by the flower stall, touching petals the way you touch a book in a store you can afford. We said hello. We made a joke about the man who plays the accordion under the awning and how he knows exactly one song. She asked how my classes were. I said they were good. She said she was trying to figure out what next looked like. I said I hoped it looked like something she could live inside. We stood for a second in the noise. Then she said, "Thank you for not humiliating me more than you had to," and I said, "Thank you for not inventing excuses that would make me hate you," and we both smiled at that, because it's not nothing. The PTA elected a new treasurer in May. I watched from a folding chair, a paper cup of coffee in my hand, and felt grateful for the dumb comfort of bylaws. After the meeting,